Hi, this is Van Walker. I would love to be with you guys right now, but my family and I currently live in Pittsburgh in the United States. My wife got a great job at Carnegie Mellon University, and so we moved back to the US. This is my presentation. I will be talking about exploring motivation to learn English in Korean University freshmen. The key to any good research, of course, is the question. In my case, the question that drove me was what motivates Korean university freshmen to learn English at all? After all, we are currently working in an industry that's worth some hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars. It's probably a good question to ask, if for no other reason, so that we can serve our learners better. For me, when I started to dig into the question, I realized that what I was looking at is what I perceive to be a tension in the idea of their need to learn. Specifically, I'm referring to what I perceive to be the tension between the importance they placed on English acquisition and the reality of their lives after they graduate from university, because it would appear that even in a modern Korea, a person graduating from university as a Korean would go into a job situation or a life situation where English is not a priority at all. And yet there seems to be this high tension to learn English, and I was curious to investigate that. In particular, I wanted to examine university freshmen because they will not have been indoctrinated into the life of a university yet. They would be new to anything that they would see in this situation. They will not have been in this milieu, if you will, of other people hustling to learn English. And so I wanted to get their perspective as people who are just coming into this situation to see if that importance was there or if it is something that is learned later. Thus, I took the next logical step and I began to put together my literature review. In particular, I was looking for studies on learner motivation in general, the motivation to learn English, Korean motivation to learn English, anything that directly related to my subject. While there was much to say about motivation and much to say about how and why non native speakers acquire English, I did not find a specific study such as the one I was proposing. The work of Donye and Ushioda became very important for me. While they hadn't done anything in the Korean context, their overall work with motivation and language acquisition became a primer for me as they broke down the theories and the authors who have contributed to this field thus far. And their own contributions are considerable, to say the least. The following terms became very important: intrinsic motivation versus instrumental motivation. Basically, motivation to learn another language operates on a continuum, if you will. At one end, there is intrinsic motivation. This is the kind where someone really admires and likes the culture in question and wants to live in it or around it. At the other end, there is instrumental motivation. This is the kind where someone is learning a language as a means to an end. Please do not cast these terms into good and bad motivations. It might be easy to suggest that intrinsic is, quote, better than instrumental, but there are uncomfortable questions about identity that would need to be answered. For example, why do these people want to leave their home culture in favor of this outside culture? At the same time, instrumental motivation is largely what moves students through universities in general anyway. All students have stared at their schedules and found that one class that they have no desire to take, but powered through it anyway because the greater goal was worth more than the 15 weeks of hell they'd have to endure to get it. It is more accurate to refer to the factors or even motivations as being positive or negative with regard to acquiring English. There is also demotivation. This is best described as a weakening of motivation by an outside force. While we, again, shouldn't cast intrinsic or instrumental motivations into good or bad categories, we can cast the relative strength of a motivation into good or bad categories, and weak motivation is most certainly bad. Demotivators directly contribute to the weakening of a motivation. Then there's amotivation. This is the utter absence of motivation, also described as learned helplessness in some situations. This means that the students have no effort to put forth because they have learned that nothing they do will get them anything better than a poor or failing grade. To them, language acquisition will simply never happen, no matter what. Okay, now that I had my definitions, I was able to create my research questions and suggest hypotheses. So, my first research question is to what extent do Korean university freshmen exhibit one of these types of motivation to learn English, whether it's intrinsic or instrumental or demotivation to learn English or amotivation to learn English? My hypothesis is that all four will likely be present to some degree, but that either instrumental motivation or demotivation will be most prevalent. And I have a sub hypothesis, which is almost more of a bone to pick than anything else, but I also kind of believe that curriculum and pedagogy will also contribute to demotivation more than anything else. My next research question is which demographic factors will significantly affect motivation? I suspect the research will show that gender and course of major study will likely affect motivation more strongly than anything else. I also suspect that women will be more intrinsically motivated while men will be more instrumentally motivated. I suspect that levels of English education will affect motivation. For example, whether one has only had English in the public school system or whether one has had a private tutoring or a Hagwon experience. I also suspect that majors which trend more toward the possibility or reality of international employment will show a stronger motivation to learn English than majors which trend more toward the possibility of local or Korean employment. Now that I knew what I wanted to find out, all I had to do now was create the correct instrument for the gathering of data. After a bit of research, I settled on a mixed method survey that would provide the frequency and descriptive statistics that would prove or disprove my hypotheses. I also made sure to have my survey translated into Korean to eliminate any possibility of a language barrier for the respondents. The first part of the survey would be a Likert or Likert scale questionnaire based on the definitions that I discovered in my literature. I created the survey statements to reflect their beliefs and opinions, and I reverse scaled them, meaning I intentionally wrote some with the positive, negative assumptions reversed to both force students to answer honestly and to determine any inconsistencies within answer groups. So I created my instrument, I conducted my surveys, I gathered the instruments, I ran them through SPSS 24, and I analyzed the data and got results. Now, I will share a brief bit of the results with you because we don't have space and time to go through everything, but I want to show you what I thought was interesting and what I found. In addition to having male and female respondents, I was also fortunate to have 10 different majors represented, which I'm hoping, or I'd hope to give me a nice broad spread of information looking for how their majors might affect their motivation. I was also fortunate to find a broad spread of educational levels represented, with people having had Hagwon English all the way up to people who'd only encountered English in public school and high school. The fun part about this was looking at the evidence and letting it tell me the story rather than trying to impose a meaning on it. And what I found, of course, is that there's going to be significance in groupings where the answers are concerned. And there will also be significance in the outliers. Where are those places where people seem to be all over the place, where the answers don't all line up neatly? What's going on in those places? Those are great places to investigate as well. I'm going to show you a couple of the slides that I developed in the course of my data analysis. Again, there's just a couple, a very, very brief picture, but I want to show you the kind of things that I'm finding in this that make it so fascinating to me. The first kind of result that I found, which shouldn't be a surprise, is that you would see a significance in grouping as regards different questions. For example, I was looking at male versus female, and the question was whether or not they found the books to be effective. And as you can see, the answers all tend to group in the same direction up toward the middle of a neutral answer, shading slightly towards somewhat true. But that's a grouping that I found to be interesting. Apparently they didn't really have a problem as much with the books as I might have thought. And so they're kind of leaning toward the true side there. Again, significant similarities, similar groupings within demographic factors. This is significant because this tells us about what they find to be troublesome or not troublesome, and it kind of lets us know how we should conduct our business as a result. The cool part about doing this kind of research, though, is that everything didn't line up very neatly, and I'll show you a picture of what we're talking about here in a second. Okay, in this particular case, I was looking at them by their education, and I was interested if they found the textbook exercises to be too easy. Now, don't get fooled by the amount of purple numbers. That just means that most of the respondents went to elementary school or encountered English in elementary school. Not a surprise there. That's not significant. What is significant is the pattern. Notice that people that had elementary school education tend to run toward the always untrue side. However, those that had a kindergarten education in English forward, they tend to run toward the somewhat true to always true. So you have a split there in terms of a perception of how textbook exercises could be too easy. And that's interesting because that's the kind of thing that makes you want to dig in a little further and find out what's going on. Yeah, those outliers within those demographic groups, those outliers within these factors is very significant also, because if they can demonstrate that there's not uniformity there, well, now we have something we can work with and perhaps draw some inferences from. So what is my current progress on this whole thing so they can get me off their books? Well, the data analysis is complete, and a draft of the dissertation is forthcoming shortly. This will be a run through of the whole thing, so it's on the way. I have published an article earlier this year. My second article is pending. It's going to be a pretty cool thing also about language acquisition, and that's going to be out very shortly. And as I said earlier, I'm currently faculty at the University of Pittsburgh. Pitt Panthers, woohoo! I'm in the linguistics department. There's my email, jaw2a8@pitt.edu. Shoot me a line if you are interested in what I'm doing. If you want to collaborate on something, or you just want to find out how I'm doing or whatever, I'd be glad to talk to you and find out what's going on. But in the meantime, thanks a lot for listening. Keep your heads up, keep pushing forward, and I hope everybody graduates. See you later.